Want to look behind the scenes at how an animated short could be edited? Here is the editing timeline of my newest short film, The Punctuation Pals. This was a joy to create. It was co created by myself and Alexander Latham. And we just recently did an episode on the channel where we are discussing the writing of the project and just a lot of other behind the scenes details with how it was produced and um, just how it all came together, how characters were designed, and it's just a really great look at the creative process behind this production. But now I just want to go even deeper into the technical side and show you just what it looks like, to have edited a short like this. What does it mean to edit animation, and just kind of what each layer represents, very literally. So without further ado, let's just go ahead and look at it. Now, you may look at a timeline like this and it may feel a little messy, as all good editing timelines do. But really, like, this is a pretty clean, organized timeline. Even if it looks, unlabeled, or you're not exactly sure where things are. So let's start by looking at the video layers and just go one by one and show you what each one does. Because pretty much, like, every element has a layer and it sticks to it throughout the entire short. For example, let's go from top to bottom. So let's turn off all the layers except the bottom one, which you can see are the backgrounds, of course. Of course they are. And then above that is the character line art. And then above that is any additional effects, like, for example, these little flares that appear to accent certain pieces of action, as well as above that is text. And if there's anything else that is above that in layers, it's any additional effects or text. This changes a little bit for scenes 3 and 4. For let's show an example. For scenes 1 and 2, you can see that the dialogue lip sync is baked into the line art. Here, like, the mouths are rendered as a part of the line art. That is not true for scenes 3 and 4. For instance, here's Dan Man, and separate from that is the mouth layer. And that was just like I was trying to iterate on my process for doing lip sync. And so for the first two scenes, I'm doing the lip sync in Blender. I do all my 3D animation in Blender. And for scenes 3 and 4, I did the lip sync in DaVinci because I thought that just might be a little bit easier. Both of those approaches had their limitations, and I used the same mouth shape, so it still looks fairly, relatively consistent. But they're just, like, applied a little bit differently. The issue with doing lip sync in Blender is that, I mean, you can see, like, this scene. This layer is all mouth shapes, right? And I had to track their movement across the frame, a little bit more manually. Where if I was doing it in 3D in Blender, it was like the object for the mouth was already parented to the character in 3D space. So tracking the mouth was not a manual process at all. The hard part was just, like, switching between mouth shapes, which was really tedious in Blender. I did that using like the shader, like, nodes in the shader tab. And just, like, basically, like, using mix nodes to dial in, like, whether one mouse shape was shown and the rest were not shown. And so it was just very tedious to go about it that way. Maybe there could have been an easier way, which is why I switched to DaVinci, because I was like, well, that seems just a little bit easier. I could just drag and drop the right mouth shape that I want. That's a lot easier. But then it's just a matter of, like, tracking the mouth, and that was a little tedious and difficult. Either way, it's tedious either way, but I preferred DaVinci a little bit, and it was a little bit smoother for me. But so that's really the difference in visuals. You can see also is, like, as far as, like, how do you edit, like, really what does editing look like? Because obviously, like, if you're editing a live action film, most of the editing is you have a bunch of footage and you're trying to figure out a sequence in which that footage plays, right? And for animation, that's a little different. Obviously, they're still editing. I'm still, like, applying effects to different layers. Like, that's still a part of it. I'm still, overlaying text and effects. But there's not really time-based editing. You can see, like, in the line art layer, it's pretty much unbroken for a single scene. For scene 1, it's completely unbroken, and these cuts at the end where images rendered like after the main rendering for the scene because it's in a different location. Um, like all of the animation was rendered, without any time cuts. Same with scene two. This is like a completely unedited or like on what do you call it? Like if you use like the blade tool, there's no cuts at all in this animation. So it's just like all the timing is figured out uh, before animating it. And in Blender I'm making the shots and essentially like editing the film as it's being animated, right? So that I don't have to do any cuts um, in post. Let's see. Then we have scene three. This is the one exception. So this scene has one little cut here where I'm smoothing over a cut between. There's a dialogue line that I think we forgot to record, and so I was just smoothing over like just between like a shot that was taken out. Um, and so that is one time-based cut that appears in the edit, but that's the only one. Is this cut in scene three? Because you can see that the shot is like has a cut in the middle of it. Scene four, there's some cuts, but none of them are for changing the timing. So here at the end of this, there's a cut to black, and so I take out, like I cut it so that there's nothing on screen, but it's the same render. Um, this cut is because I re-rendered part of the shots. So it's like this is still continuous, like the frames are continuous with the previous render, but I re-rendered the ending because so there's these two characters that appear behind Dan-Man, and they don't appear earlier in the scene, but they appear behind him here, and their character designs were changed pretty late into the process. That was one of Alex's final notes, and I'm glad that he made that note because now it's a lot more cohesive. Dan Man himself has this white and rainbow aesthetic, and Alex said he was like, there's these guys that show up to support Dan Man. They should share his aesthetic too. Even though like this character is Night Terror. The Night Terror is a superhero that appears in a previous short film of mine. He appears in a live action short film. There's also like a digital double for the Night Terror character, which was adapted and its colors changed to appear, in a cartoon style for this short, which I think is a fun little nod. But their character designs, like the colors of their suits, were changed, and so this was re-rendered at the very end, and that's continuous. This new render is carried over into the end of the film, where because they're still there. So it was just about fixing those characters. That was the only difference. So that's why there's cuts. But other than that, it's like everything was pretty much like locked as far as like when I animated it in Blender and put the shots together there, which I think is really cool. It's just a really like streamlined process. And of course, like it took some time to get there. I don't think there's any like storyboards still in this version of the edit, but I mean, we storyboarded everything and time locked the storyboards after we made them. Alex and I both made storyboards, and I think if I remember, I think he did the first two scenes and I did the last two scenes. I think that's the way it was split up. So he did the storyboards for this intro where they fight Flying Squirrel Man, and the bar scene. Yeah, I did the recruitment center and the final fight. I think that's true. Um, and of course, like I don't know, like I think it's cool because it's all cohesive because like I did like the 3D shots like all in Blender and like it's all animated under the same umbrella. But so I think it all feels very cohesive through there. But yeah, it's like it was storyboarded by the both of us, and that made a huge difference. Because a lot of this, like the timing, is all in line with, like there was a cut of the film where we had storyboards, we had the voice acting, and we cut the storyboards to the voice acting, and the timing was locked with that. And so, like we had basically, I was able to compose and do sound effects, like early sound effects before there was even animation, and then kind of make the animation around the voice acting, and pretty much every shot change. There may be like a couple of things I changed the timing of, like as I was animating it in Blender, but pretty much every time that there's like a shot cut, there's a cut between shots. That was something that was like is completely true to the timing of the storyboards. Maybe with a couple of small exceptions, but like I can't even remember what the exceptions are. Um, so it was a very fluid process, and I was able to just like really use like the storyboards like as the bible for this short, and I think that that really helped just kind of make this process like relatively easy. There were things that were hard. That this I mean this it took a year to finish the animation, and it's like now as I'm recording this, it's like, oh, if I could have reanimated this, I would do everything completely differently. I feel like I've learned so much and grown so much, but I just wanted to stick the landing, finish it, and be consistent with like it's just like some of this animation's a year old now. It's like, oh, I would have done this completely differently, but like I think it still tells the story, and I'm happy with how it looks. It's vibrant, and stylized, and I still like that. Um, there's just stuff about like the character models, right, that are like kind of low poly. It's hard to make them super expressive, for instance, and their hands are all like, they don't have fingers, some of them, right? There's stuff that's just like hard to work with these models, and it's like, well, I would do things differently now. Um, However, it's like, I'm still happy with this. I think it still tells the story we want to tell, and I did want to just like, I don't know, like, I worked on it last year, and so finishing it this year, it's like, well, I'm not going to redo everything, even if I would redo it, if I was starting from scratch now. I want to finish it so that I can move on and make the next project even better. That's usually my philosophy. But anyway, let's talk about the audio layers and just kind of run through the way that they are organized. So, pretty much, so we have all of these mono tracks that say one. That's one because that's the number of tracks. So, two tracks is stereo, one track is audio, mono, excuse me. So, all of that is for the voice acting because we wanted the voices to be centered. You don't have to have your voices on a mono channel. You can definitely like do stereo, like surround sound style, for your voice mixing whenever you mix dialogue. But for this short, I thought it made sense just to keep it all centered. It's always easier to follow that way. And in most short films, like you should have your dialogue centered. There's just times where like if someone's off screen and you hear their voice from like off screen, maybe that could be like mixed slightly differently. Like there's time and a place for stereo dialogue mixing, but usually I avoid that, just for the sake of making sure that it's clear, and that anyone can hear it. Maybe they only have one earbud in, right? And you still want them to be able to understand the dialogue. I think it's okay to mix and edit with those people in mind, right? And I think you should, right? Because that's how most people are going to hear it, is like they're going to be watching the short on their phone, right? Maybe with one earbud in, right? So you do have to think about those people. Even if you're like, well, ideally this might be shown like, at least on a good TV with a good set of speakers, maybe in a theater, and I want to mix it so that like if they're in that controlled space, that I know how the experience is going to be, and I can edit around that, right? And it's going to be with great audio and great visuals. So all the black levels of the visuals, it's like I know that like they're not going to they're not going to miss anything because the brightness is low. But like obviously it's like it's hard to plan around that. And it's like I think you should create your art with the knowledge that like it's going to be viewed in a variety of situations. Right. And like I think about this even with the cut, right? Like, are people going to be paying attention to every shot, or is it because if I don't know, like I think you should reward people for paying attention, but just like philosophically, right, about filmmaking, I think it's okay to be aware that like, well, what if someone like looks away for just a second to like, sip their drink or something, right? Like, what if, so you should be editing in such a way where like a shot that's important maybe doesn't last for only a second, give people a second. Or make sure that there's like a second chance to pick up on information, or that there's enough of a chance. You should have to be careful about that stuff. And obviously, it's like I don't want people to compromise their art just for the lowest common denominator or whatever. But I think those are things that you should be aware of whenever you're making a piece. But anyway, so there's all these layers, and most of the dialogue is only a couple of people layered up at a time. This is interesting because there's a news anchor that talks throughout most of this scene, and they're EQ'd so that like it kind of blends into the background. There's what would you call that, a high pass filter. We're cutting off the low end, and so kind of, or no, excuse me, I think this is a low pass filter. I think we're cutting off the high end, so it kind of blends into the background. It may start with a high pass filter. It uses distortion for the high pass filter. Excuse me. Anyway. but just yeah, like the news anchor talks on the TV throughout the whole scene, but that's just blended in the background. So that's one of the few cases where there's like 3 layers potentially at a time. And there's 2 layers, only one character is really ever talking at once, but there's just a little bit of a tail, where like I want to make sure that there's enough time for like a character to say their line and finish the breath, of course, before another character comes in. So that's why there's, 2 active layers throughout most of the time. And then there's times where like all the characters say something together. There's a couple of unison lines, so that's why there's a bunch of these dialogue layers, even though they're not all used all the time. There's a couple of instances there where they all say like punctuation pals punctuate all together, and then here I think they all sigh together. At the end, they all laugh together. Is there anything in the first scene that's in unison? I think those are all the unison points. And there's a couple of sound effects too that like exist in these mono layers, but mostly it's just reserved for dialogue. And then audio layer 8, of course, is the music. That was really fun to compose, and I'm happy with how it turned out. I think that is all, yeah, that's all on layer 8 to the very end, and yeah, like I'm happy with that. So that's organized. 9 is ambient sound, which not every scene has. Most of them do, except for scene 3. And I think that's fine. I just wanted to focus on the dialogue here, not have too much distracting noise. You meet Dan Man, so I like that it's quieter. And then so the music comes in, and it's like that's when the ambient noise kind of comes in. It's like saved for the music. I think I tried putting ambient noise, and it just felt like with the music, with the dialogue, it felt too distracting, and I just wanted to focus on what they were saying. Here, and like when the city, I think it's okay to have some ambience, have kind of a lot going on, and it's okay to overwhelm the audience a little bit every now and then, right? It's like they can still hear the dialogue and understand what's going on, but I also wanted this kind of chaotic feeling where there's noise in the background, there's traffic, right, that's passing by, and you feel that. You go into scene 2, and they're in a crowded bar, so there's all these kind of people talking in the background, and it's not as distracting, but I want it to feel like a full space. And then scene 4, they're outside again, so I want you to hear the traffic, right? I want that to be something people are picking up on. And then anything below that is additional sound effects. And the film is full of sound effects, right? Because there's all of these different like hits and explosions and all these little things where they're fight scenes, right? So there's a bunch of different like kind of sound effects, like ushering in what am I trying to say? Like accenting the movements and hits of these fights. So it was a lot of fun to like do the sound design. I wanted to like not make it too crazy. I wanted to like just pretty much accent what needed accenting and not overload the audience with just a bunch of different things. When I was editing Star Boys, I felt like I did a lot of sound effects sometimes for scenes that didn't need a bunch of sound effects. Like whenever the car flew somewhere. Star Boys is a sci-fi miniseries I made, and there's this flying car that flies through space. And I felt like sometimes I just like did a bunch of layers, and so there's whooshes and there's engines, and there's like 3 whooshes at once. And I don't know, like I don't think it's terrible, but that is something where it's like I wanted to just be a little more utilitarian with sound mixing. I think it is about combining more layers than you expect sometimes, to really make that like sound. But I did kind of feel like that was something where I didn't want a bunch of distracting sound ideas. I wanted it all to be cohesive. And so like I'm fairly happy with the sound overall. And maybe I'll change that philosophy. Maybe I'll realize that no, it is about a bunch of layers. You just have to mix it right. But that's something that just may change over time. But anyway, this is the Punctuation Pals. That's just a run through of what the edit looks like. And I mean most of this film, there was like when I was especially like syncing up the dialogue, like that took a lot of time in the editing process. But most of this film was made like in Blender. That's where a lot of the work went into, like actually making the animation, producing it there, figuring out the posing of characters, the position of the camera. Of course, that's where a lot of the work went into. And doing lip sync there. It's just the final scenes where I did a lot of lip syncing in DaVinci. And so really like this editing process, like in DaVinci wasn't as intensive, as it could be for other projects. But like it was still a process and it still took a lot of work. And I'm really excited to share this project with y'all. And if y'all haven't seen it, I recommend y'all checking it out. But anyway, I mean, thank you so much for watching this video. I will see y'all in the next one. So without further ado, I'll let you go.